Now, verse 4, now when the days of his mourning were past, Joseph spoke to the household of Pharaoh, saying, if now I have found favor in your eyes, please speak in the hearing of Pharaoh, saying, my father made me swear, saying, behold, I am dying. In my grave, which I dug for myself in the land of Canaan, there you shall bury me. Now, therefore, please let me go up and bury my father, and I will come back. And Pharaoh said, go up and bury your father, as he made you swear. Now, just a little Bible nerd point for you here. When the Bible talks about going up to somewhere or going down to somewhere, it's not talking about direction as we would. You know, like you would go up to Philadelphia, you'd go down to Richmond. We describe things, directionally. In Bible times, people traveled on foot. So when you read they went up or they went down, it's talking about a change in elevation because they're traveling on foot. So Joseph went up to bury his father at Machpelah and Hebron, or Hebron. Hebron is at a higher elevation than Goshen. I point that out because sometimes you see that used, and we would look at a map and say, well, no, he didn't go up, he went down, or he didn't go down, he went up. Because they're not talking about direction, they're talking about elevation. For example, in the Gospels, it talks about Jesus going from Nazareth, and it says he went down to Capernaum. If you looked at a map, you'd say he went up to Capernaum. Nazareth is at a higher elevation than Capernaum. So just note that. And so Joseph here, he received permission from Pharaoh to return to Canaan to bury his father at the cave of Machpelah. And then it brings to mind the story in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 8, of the disciple that went to Jesus and said, I want to follow you, but let me first go bury my father. And Jesus said, follow me and let the dead bury the dead. As important as Pharaoh was, Jesus is more important. Service to Jesus is more needful. You stay and serve the Lord. Don't go off to do that. And so verse 7, so Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went all the servants of Pharaoh, and the elders of his house, and all the elders of the land of Egypt, as well as all the house of Joseph, his brothers, and his father's house. Only their little ones, their flocks, and their herds they left in the land of Goshen. And there went up with him both chariots and horsemen, and it was a very great gathering. So this is a huge funeral procession with all the Egyptian dignitaries and leaders traveling in this procession with chariots and horsemen. This is what we would call today a state funeral, with all the pomp and ceremony of the Egyptians. And then they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond the Jordan, and they mourned there with a great and very solemn lamentation. He observed 7 days of mourning for his father. So this huge processional comes to a threshing floor, and they use it to have a 7-day funeral ceremony. And the Hebrew word for 7 here is Shiva. Maybe you've heard that word before. Even modern day Jews traditionally mourn for the dead for 7 days. It comes from this passage here in Genesis chapter 50. So verse 11, and when the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, saw the mourning at the threshing floor of Atad, they said, this is a deep mourning of the Egyptians. Therefore, its name was called Abelmizraim, which is beyond the Jordan. That means the mourning of the Egyptians, the mourning of Egypt. So his sons did for him just as he had commanded them. So Jacob is buried. For his sons carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah before Mamre, which Abraham bought. Let me remind you of that. Abraham purchased this land legally with the field from Ephron the Hittite as property for a burial place. And after he had buried his father, Joseph returned to Egypt, he and his brothers, and all who went up with him to bury his father. And verse 15, when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, perhaps Joseph will hate us and may actually repay us for all the evil which we did to him. Now, at this point, Joseph's brothers have lived in Egypt with Joseph for 17 years. Joseph has cared for them and provided for them for 17 years. And they're still worried Joseph will repay them for all the evil they did to him. It's amazing how guilt can plague a person for years. And so they're still guilty, they're still concerned. So they sent messengers to Joseph saying, before your father died, he commanded us. So they send messengers to Joseph. They don't go in person, they send it by message. They're too afraid to go to Joseph themselves. They send a messenger. Before your father died, he commanded, saying, thus you shall say to Joseph, I beg you, please forgive the trespass of your brothers and their sin, for they did evil to you. Now please forgive the trespass of the servants of the God of your father. And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. Now Jacob never left these instructions. Jacob never said this to the other brothers. The brothers made this story up. And what the brothers say here, it doesn't even make sense. If Jacob was concerned about Joseph taking vengeance on his brothers, Jacob would have had this conversation with Joseph, not with the brothers. He wouldn't have told the other sons, hey, just tell him this after I die, right? That I want my desire is for him to forgive you guys. They're making this whole thing up.